If you've ever been into a physio and or physical therapist to try and treat and permanently resolve chronic lower body pain and sometimes chronic lower back pain, you may have done a test that they refer to as the Ober test. And in postural restoration, this is called the adduction drop test. And it looks something like this. The implication is very different in the way that a physiotherapist would perform this test versus a postural restoration trained specialist. So in physio and or physical therapy, this test is ascribed to diagnose IT band tightness, which I could rant about that kind of being outdated science and outdated junk science, for lack of a better term, in terms of the IT band really being able to actually tighten. But that's not worth really getting into, versus how we treat it in postural restoration, which is as a test to tell us our pelvic orientation. Basically, just know that the way the test is being interpreted by licensed professionals might not really be the way we want to interpret said test. So, in postural restoration, that adduction drop test is really trying to diagnose something called left ADT. I've discussed this previously in more videos and context regarding why we end up stuck in these patterns. But basically, what you need to know is this. It means that your pelvis is oriented to the right all the time. So if you drew a circle around this, it'd go like this from a top view, like so. And what's happening is that because you can only stabilize and stay on your right leg, this right hemipelvis is pushed back and in, while this left hemipelvis is pushed forward and out. That's the simple way to put it. If you want more anatomical terms, really it just means that the right hemipelvis is stable because it's in extension and internal rotation and adduction, while the left hemipelvis is in flexion and external rotation and abduction, abduction. So, what does this mean when we do that test? So again, I'm going to play the video. In this video, I'm performing the test on someone, and what you're going to see is that their leg does not drop to the table. And the physical reason for that occurring is this. This is important as a prelude towards what I'm going to get into. This femur is not going to be able to cross that midline of the pelvis. And that's because this femur is going to be hitting this landmark on your pelvis called the obturator foramen. This guy here. It's going to hit this as it tries to adduct. And that's because that left hemipelvis is shifted so far forward. It's shifted like this and out. It's going to make it so that when your femur tries to go past that midline, it just hits that obturator foramen. It can't move properly in its acetabulum. And now you have a left leg that does not abduct. And specifically, we're talking about the left leg, and that's what's shown in that test, because in postural restoration, primarily what we are testing for in that test is to see, for lack of a better term, at least in a biomechanical sense, if you have a left hamstring and a left adductor. Because if you have both of those things, then your pelvis will go from this to, hey, I have a left hamstring, going to go back, and now I have an adductor, going to go in. It's going to reshape the pelvic orientation that you're currently stuck in due to stuff that I've talked about in other videos. And that would mean that that femur can actually adduct, hit the table, and now you know you have a left hamstring and a left adductor. But postural restoration isn't all biomechanics. The biomechanical stuff is important and there is a place for it. However, the most important thing in postural restoration is how the brain works. Because if we cannot get the brain in a parasympathetic state, if we can't get our nervous system out of fight mode all the time, you're not going to get that left hamstring and that left adductor to function properly in terms of the biomechanical sense. Because really what I was trying to show you and demonstrate is that that's the physical impingement and the physical reason that left leg might not be dropping when we perform an adduction drop test. However, the brain has a lot more saying why you're not going to get that leg to drop than a left hamstring and left adductor do, at least in theory, because the brain comes first, the biomechanics come second. So part of the issue is just the way that our society functions to some extent and underutilization of certain things. And I think a fantastic YouTube channel that does a great job discussing this stuff is Neil Hallinan. So please check his stuff out as well, because that guy is a saint. He knows very, very well what he is talking about, and I would highly regard his work and trust it, because the guy is very experienced and he understands that postural restoration is a brain and not a biomechanical issue. So what happens is this. We have a left hemisphere of the brain and a right hemisphere of the brain. They do not function isolated from one another or in isolation from one another. It's more just that the left brain is very good at certain things and the right brain is very good at certain things. There is functional overlap, but it's kind of like having a musician play music and a chef cook food. They can swap and potentially do the stuff that they're not used to doing, but are they going to do it as well? Not necessarily, and that's where the brain comes into play. So we have a left hemisphere of the brain. This controls a right half of our body. We know this based on stroke victims. So paralysis on one side of the body, we see which part of the brain is still active, and that's kind of how we figured out the hemisphere of the brains. And this left brain is really good at analytical and logical thinking. So science, math, language, not so much the creative side. It's very rational, and it's kind of your base state, for lack of a better term. Coming back to the idea of fight or flight, when we feel threatened, when we have stress in our lives, when we aren't living in a way that allows us to be, for lack of a better term, inhibited or not inhibited, maybe is the best way to put it, especially on that right side. Our default is to stay on that right side of our body. Shift over there, never get off that left leg, and stay in that aforementioned pelvic position. That's the right hemisphere of the brain. The left hemisphere of the brain. Apologies, the left, not the right. The right hemisphere is a lot different. Right brain, left body. Again, we know this because of what I just talked about. And this side of the brain is very good at art, music. So visual system, auditory system, and creativity in those regards, as well as critical thinking. So this is kind of our emotional side and less logical side. It's kind of the side of the brain that makes us human. And this is something that's very interesting, because if you start to implement certain artistic hobbies into your lifestyle, you can actually probably reduce your chronic pain to some extent, because chronic pain can be somewhat lifestyle induced. That's a video for another time, but basically just know that we need to have this part of the brain let go and this part of the brain turn on more, and we can do that by integrating more of this stuff into our lives to make it so that this pelvis becomes neutral, like so, and we can switch back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that is about all I have to say without running over myself and repeating a bunch of crap that you don't necessarily need to hear. If you like this video, please consider leaving a like, a comment, subscribing to the channel. If there is content you would like to see from me specifically, please feel free to let me know. I appreciate anyone who made it to the end of the video taking the time to watch this. I sincerely hope that it was helpful and you gathered some useful information from this. And to whoever sticks around, I will see you in the next video that I post.